To any 911 call operators, what is the funniest 911 call you've ever had? My kid worked for animal control. We are eating dinner and 911 dispatch calls him. Some panicked lady had called 911 about an owl in a tree that couldn't fly. It had been sitting in the tree for a half hour not moving. Of course it was just before dusk and the owl was just waiting for dark so it could go hunt for dinner. Then there was the call about the one-legged duck at the park. Edit to add, he actually went to the park to make sure the duck wasn't injured but realized after 15 minutes how silly he looked chasing after this one-legged duck that was outrunning him. A guy calls from a payphone to complain that he has a pipe wrench stuck up his butt and he needed an ambulance. He gave his location as the corner where the payphone was located. I asked him if he could tell me his appearance so I could be sure the medics could find him. His response, "Look dude, I'll be the only guy on the corner with a pipe wrench in his butt." I couldn't argue with that. Not 911 but worked for animal control dispatch in a tourist town during my senior year in HS. Got a call from a lady that had called 911 previously and was told to call our number. Picked up the phone to what sounded like a whole car of very panicked people all yelling at once. After asking what was wrong several times I finally heard someone yell a deer. "There's a deer in somebody's yard, you all gotta come pick it up." Thinking it was a dead deer/roadkill I said an animal control officer would come pick up the body soon. And a kid in the background starts bawling saying the officer was gonna kill it. So I paused for a second and asked, "Is the deer alive? What is it doing?" Someone far away from the phone yelled, "It's just sitting there in the yard." So I said, "Yeah, this is Texas. He lives there. Just don't touch him or get too close and y'all will be okay." Literally not even 5 minutes later we got a call from another tourist about a deer chasing a family after they tried to take a selfie with it. To this day I'm still not sure if it was the same family, but wow. I hope it was. My mom was a 911 operator in the SF Bay Area in the 80s and 90s. I asked her to tell me a story to pass along, so here it is. I got a 911 call and I couldn't understand the caller. He was slurring his words. I knew he was calling from a bar so I asked if he'd been drinking and after asking many times I was able to determine that he wanted the police, not an ambulance. He wanted to file assault charges because a woman pulled his tongue. I asked, "How was she able to pull your tongue?" And he said, "Because I stuck it out at her." I had to keep muting the call because I was laughing so hard. Apparently my supervisor went on to play this call in seminars for years and always got a ton of laughter. I used to do overnight security, and have had to call 911 several times. My favorite was a gentleman who was obviously on something, jittery, touching his face a lot, couldn't sit still. He tried to break into a house next to our campus. So I dialed 911 right then. As I'm giving them a description of what he is wearing, he starts stripping his clothes off, running across our campus. So I have to tell the 911 operator, "Yeah, he butt naked in the middle of street, laying down. I think he's doing the worm." We lost the guy on cameras, no clue where he is. 5 cop cars show up and they round up the only guy in our area with no shoes or a shirt. We went outside to give the cops a statement, and the guy is trying to convince the police that he is the one who called them to report someone stealing his shoes. The cops don't bite for a second. But they let him go, and he just runs off into the night. Barefoot, no shirt. My late aunt once called 911 because my uncle wouldn't change the fan that was blowing on her. Because it was a small community in Nee, Michigan, the police laughed and came out and changed the fan. My department dispatches our area's animal control after hours. Once received a call from a guy freaking out because he caught a possum in his house. I asked him which room he was able to confine the animal and he didn't tell me which room, but said he trapped it in a microwave. I had many questions. Edit, thank you everyone. I rarely comment on anything and didn't expect this. First time getting an award too. Edit 2, this is insane to me. Thank you guys so much. I've been dispatching for 10 years now and have plenty of stories if anyone wants more. This one is just my wife's favorite story, so I figured people would enjoy it. Not an operator. But I had a friend in high school who got addicted to meth. Years after she got out of rehab, she told me the story about how she ended up in rehab. She had called the police on herself because, "There are demons living in my walls and I'd like the police to come remove them." When she sobered up, she also realized she didn't live next to a pool. That's important because while she was high she would sit outside and watch people swim. She did that for 2 years, even though there was no pool. At a long-term care facility I worked at, one of our residents called 911 with the phone in her room because she didn't get ketchup with her lunch. Not kidding. The sheriff's office called back to let the nurses know what she'd done while I was standing right there. I've never laughed so hard at work. Not an operator, but one time I went to a local library to do work as my home was filled with loud guests. I'm there for a couple hours and I saw I had 25 minutes left. So I packed all my stuff up and brought it to the bathroom so I could take a shit, not leave my stuff unattended and they immediately just leave. Y'all, they locked me in. The librarians thought I left. The whole place was empty and dark. I walked right out the front door, which was locked, and triggered the alarm. Now, not to throw race into it, but I'm a big Latino man in a very white and upper class part of my state. So there was a real sense of fear I had. Lol. I didn't want to be caught driving away from this scene in case any Karens were peeping out their windows. I had to call the cops on myself and explain that I got locked in the library while taking a shit and the operator is dying. Cops show up and one of them goes, "So you like breaking in and taking shits, huh?" I went white as a ghost and started immediately bumbling my words. They brought the whole department out because they thought it was the funniest shit. Thankfully they were cool and just laughed at my dumbass. I'm not sure if this is true, but I read about an old lady who called 911 because a ghost was in her house. She was a sweet woman who apparently made calls often, so the officers showed up and pretended to arrest the ghost so she would feel better. Not the operator, but told by an operator friend of mine. Woman calls up to allege that her car has been sexually soiled by a car washer. She had left her car with the valet service while she was shopping, picked it up and drove it home before she noticed a white mark on her passenger seat. She's convinced it was spunk, so she calls the police to report it. Operator asked if she had complained to the company, which she had. They had advised her that the soap they use for fabrics sometimes leaves a mark when it dries and if she just gives it a quick rub, it will go. She then tells the operator that she knows the company is lying because she put her finger on it and then tasted it, and it was definitely spunk and she knows very well what spunk tastes like. Somehow the operator convinced her to complain further to the valeting company and ended the call before falling off his chair laughing. I was a relay operator for the deaf, hard of hearing, and speech disabled. Was instructed to call 911 because a guy left his cardigan at the doctor's office. Fair play to him. The doctor's answering machine outgoing message, which I faithfully relayed to him, did indeed say, "If this is an emergency, dial 911. Pre-911, before addresses were automatically shown, a couple having sex knocked the phone off the nightstand and they had the police on speed dial. I thought she was being choked out, so I had the phone company track the address and sent the cavalry. When they pounded on the front door I heard the woman say, "Oh my God, there are 5 cop cars outside." The guy went downstairs and she picked up the phone and said hello. I said, "Hello, Mom, this is the police. Are you okay?" She said, "I'm fine. We were busy." I said I had been listening for the last few minutes and she said, "Oh. We must have knocked the phone on the floor." The patrol guys told the guy they had to see her in person at the same time I was talking to her. She came downstairs so they could verify she was okay. They said she was pretty embarrassed. Edit, thank you so much for the awards. My first ones ever. I was the caller. My deck had a couple unsafe spots. Normally I avoided them just fine, but on this night, it had snowed. I stepped outside for just a minute, because snow is very rare here. In doing so, I forgot about the unsafe spots. I stepped on one, and my leg dropped through. As I fell, the boards on either side of my leg bent, but then retracted. The hole was smaller than my knee now. I couldn't get out. My girlfriend got me a coat to sit on, because my butt was already starting to get cold, and we called 911. Fortunately, I live so close to the fire department, they were there in less than 3 minutes. I live so close, had I Wilhelm screamed as I fell, they'd have likely heard me and arrived even faster. But 4 super strong firemen couldn't pull me out either, and I will add to that I think the first half of this sentence would be fairly humorous out of context. Anyway, one of them went to get a chainsaw out of the fire truck, and while we waited, I started singing The Pit from Parks and Rec, and they all joined in with me, and we had a good laugh about my situation. Other than having a sore, purple leg for a few days, I was fine. I bought them all coffee a few days later. Super fun guys. 10/10ths. Would definitely be rescued by them again. 112 from Europe. Man, I can't count them all. A man called to say he's wrestling with deadly 10 meters, 32 to 33 feet, snake in his backyard. He was very scared, and although I wasn't sure how did a 10 meters snake appeared in his backyard, I sent the emergency to the police. They even called him back, but his father answered. The conversation was quite funny. Hello, sir. Police here. Is this Mr. Y? His father. Do you know where your son is? I don't know. Went to the backyard, I guess. Maybe you should check on him. He might be fighting for his life against a deadly snake. Turned out the guy was a little high and was wrestling with a bush. Dude wanted an ambulance because he needed to check if his girlfriend was pregnant or not. I heard her in the back saying, but my period is over 2 months late. And he was like, no, no, no. A doctor needs to see it first. He didn't want to accept that it was not an emergency, and couldn't understand how gynecologists usually aren't in an ambulance. Not sure if stories about people with mental illnesses should qualify, but there are some strong contenders like the Queen of Hamsters, that's how she introduced herself, whose internet connection apparently was cut off because she did not like one of our politicians. But she does now, and she wants her internet back. A man wanted to prank his friend and hid in his kitchen behind sink. He couldn't get out and fire brigade was needed to free him. Woman called to report seeing a shark in the ocean. Yes, mom. That is where we keep them. I worked the jail, not 911, or anything related to that, wholly distinct from the other agencies in the county. Some guy called about 2 a.m. flipping the fuck out because his meth bark smelled funny, and wanted the fire department, but no cops. I got an address out of him after a ridiculous runaround, and sent it over to the dispatch people across town. They didn't send cops, he was in the county, they sent deputies, and the fire department, and the DEA, and the hazmat team, and he got to come visit and then go spend an ungodly amount of time with the state DOC. I think he got 50+ years. The house/property he was renting was demolished and is a hazardous area now because he was making so much meth, and I think explosives. My so is an EMT and has many hilarious stories. The one she loves to share is, she was responding to a frequent flyer, they call a lot, who was basically given the choice to ride with them to the hospital or go to jail for the abuse of calling 911 again. This patient was wearing a robe. They brought him to the hospital and he's drunk as always. When she does the call in for the hospital asks if the guy is wearing a blue robe. She says he is. You've never heard such displeasure in a person's voice when the hospital replied, we will be happy to see you when you get here. So they get to the hospital and put the guy in a room. My so goes to check the guy in while her partner stays in the room with the guy. The nurse was upset and said, oh no, I've heard about this guy. I've worked here so long and never seen him. My so goes back into the room and the guy is walking out of the bathroom and his robe is wide open. She then learned he was not wearing any underwear. The nurse came in, saw the guy, threw her hands up in the air and walked out without saying anything. I'm a 911 operator for the ambulance service. Was processing a call one time that required a Cantonese interpreter over the phone as the caller did not speak English. Was told by the interpreter the caller was phoning for her husband who had abdominal pain and was constipated for over a week. The caller and the interpreter then go back and forth talking for some time before I interrupt. Me, sorry interpreter, what is she saying? Interpreter, I'm just making sure I've understood what she's asking correctly. Me, what is she asking? Interpreter, she's asking if she can help it out. Using a spoon. Me, no tell her not to do that. She later referred to where the pain was as his poo pipe, but at least that one made sense. I used to be a 911 operator from 2014 to 2018. I was also responsible for training new hires on answering phones. One day, I get a medic call for a guy wanting an ambulance because he has hemorrhoids. I try to get more information from him like his name, phone number, and where he's located. I get all of that. He starts screaming my asshole. During his screams about his asshole, I turn to my trainee and blankly stare at her. That was about 6 years ago. We still joke about it to this day. Okay, X911 dispatcher EMTI here. So while on light duty due to injury working rescue calls, I was trained to do 911 call intakes in Florida and worked midnight shifts. Always the craziest type of calls. I receive a call from a hysterical teenage boy. After getting him to calm down, he tells me that his friend has been swallowed up by a tube monster. So I asked him where this tube monster is at. Are you there with the tube monster right now? He says yes, he can hear his friend, but he is trapped. After finally being able to get the location of the caller, this is in the 90s, units are called to the scene, police, fire, and ambulance. Now I have been on the phone for over 20 minutes with this young man and had him stay on the phone until help arrived. Then he says, "Man, my dad's gonna kill me." I asked him why? He says, "'Cause I promised him I wouldn't drop acid anymore, and we've been tripping all night." So I had to get on the radio and advise crews coming in of the current mental status of both caller and victim. When crews arrived, they found the teen at the bottom of a hill stuck inside of an actual plastic tube they had been climbing inside of and rolling each other down said hill while tripping. The teen had to be extricated. The other teen was found by the payphone awaiting dad's wrath. Sorry, not a 911 operator, but Atlanta radio show in 1990s frequently played a 911 call they somehow got hold of. Guy had stopped to pick up what he thought was a dead roadkill deer and put it in his station wagon. Deer woke up and goes berserk, kicking and biting him. Guy stops the car at a phone booth, calls 911 demanding a ambulance, and while he's trying to do this, some stray mutt starts trying to bite him. He thinks cause he smells like a deer. So you get all the sound effects of barking dog, man hollering at it, then explaining the zany mishap that got him in this situation. I never did figure out what happened to the deer. I had a call from a male who said he needed an ambulance because the beans are out of the pod. Not being entirely sure what he meant, I asked a few more questions. Seems he had an argument with his wife and things got physically violent. She grabbed his genitals tightly with her hand. He pushed her away. She did not let go. It ripped open. I dispatched the ambulance for a testicular degloving injury, as well as the police. Ambulance made me repeat the dispatch and then called by phone to confirm. Couldn't believe their ears. I remember a story about these kids that bought 20 pounds of weed in one state and tried to take it back home. They got too high and thought they were being followed by cops as they saw a bunch on the journey back. They pulled over, called dispatch and told them where they were and that they were going to wait for the cops to come arrest them for bringing weed across state lines. Police had no idea WTF they were talking about but went and arrested them for trafficking. https://youtube.b/zomri927p. When I was a 911 call taker, I got a call from a gentleman reporting an issue with his toilet. For whatever reason, it was a bit hard for me to understand exactly what the problem was, except that it definitely involved his toilet. After a little while, I determined to the best of my ability that the toilet was overflowing and he didn't know what to do. Although plumbing issues are absolutely not an appropriate reason for calling 911, it wasn't unheard of. To a certain extent I can understand the thought process, and people have certainly called 911 for less. After a bit more talking, however, I realized that he had not called about a plumbing issue. You see, it wasn't water that was coming out of his toilet, but demons. The demons were spilling out of his toilet and he needed help. I put in a complaint for the police. I know, cops for a mental health issue is not ideal, but it's the only thing we had, and kept him on the phone as he was fairly distressed. Unfortunately, it was a busy evening and the cops wouldn't be able to get to him for a few minutes. As such, I asked if he could close the toilet lid. He said he could, and he did. Did this stop the demons from coming out of his toilet? It did. This made him much more calm and I was able to release the call. Can't remember what ended up happening with him. I guess he was taken to the local ER that had a psychiatric crisis center voluntarily. But it stands out as the time I solved a caused toilet demon problem with a very straightforward solution. We occasionally have people call in, concerned that their local convenience store is locked and they can get in. Well ma'am, that just means the clerk is using the restroom. They've been gone over 5 minutes. Some things take longer than others. We've had people wanting police because those a-hole McDonald's employees refused to sell them a Whopper. My favorite though was the woman who was spelling out a name for us, using her own special brand of phonetics. D like dinosaur, O like oh my god. N like no one. I spent a few months as an EMS call receiver when I wasn't in the field. I had more than a few calls that had me shaking my head or in disbelief, but only one where I had to hand my headset to the guy next to me. Once I confirmed the address and that the caller was requesting an ambulance, I asked the most obvious question: why do you need an ambulance? The caller, sounding like a young woman, spoke in such a hushed tone that I couldn't hear her. She mummed, "There's Humphreys coming out." My Gina, what? She repeated herself, "I've got Humphreys coming out, my Gina, I'm sorry, I can't hear you." Apparently this exchange took too long, because a very angry male voice came out of the receiver. "She got shit coming out her pussy." I was caught so off guard I just cracked. I handed my headset to the guy next to me. I couldn't even explain why. He finished the call, hung up and just looked at me, shook his head and went back to his own terminal. Former here. I had a guy call in to try and rat out a Chinese massage parlor for giving out happy endings. It was clear that he had some kind of religious guilt about it or something with a deal gone wrong, clearly not a case of molestation, so this is okay to laugh at. And was trying to make amends. While the premise alone is funny, he refused to say hand job, jacked off, etc. He kept beating around the bush about it and wouldn't give details, just heavy implications. Over the course of this 5-minute call, every other dispatcher picked up on the line and muted their mics, but the room was howling with laughter as this dude danced around getting a tuggy. Eventually, I passed it off his call to the detective/vice division, but that was a very funny 5 minutes of work-safe masturbation humor. He had another call from a neighboring town that called us because the local department wouldn't take him seriously. His issue was that a co-worker threatened to, and I quote, punch his dick off. The second he said it, I started laughing because I wasn't expecting it. He said it with what felt like a comical tone to it as well. I recovered well enough and eventually told him there wasn't exactly a lot we could do, as it was out of our jurisdiction, but he kept repeating that he was going to have his dick punched off, and I dunno, something about that still makes me laugh to this day. Almost cartoonish levels of violence enters my head where a whiner just gets falcon punched clean off and it makes me giggle. A young kid called and asked to talk to the fire trucks. It was pretty late at night, so I told him the fire trucks were already sleeping and asked him to put a parent on the phone. Another time, the caller said, "Is this the crust crab?" Reflex kicked in, and I replied, "No, this is Patrick," before I even realized what had happened. I had one, not too many months ago, from a Spanish-speaking man. I answered, he immediately began speaking in Spanish. No big deal, I say no habla, momento por favor, translator line. And get the language line on the phone and ask questions that they translate and give me his responses for. Nothing big, he just heard some shouting and odd noises. Suddenly the language line drops, and I'm still on the phone with the guy. In broken high school Spanish, I tell him 1 minute, I'm sorry. As I tried to fumble my keypad to redial language line. He just responds, in perfect, nearly accentless English, so. Are the cops coming? My brain freezes and I just manage to say, yes sir, they've been dispatched. Call us back if anything changes. Okay, thanks. Click. I stared at my screens for a hot minute before breaking into distressed laughter. I had to discard the funny to us but too hard to explain why because of our dark and wildly inappropriate sense of humor stories to find an appropriate one, but here it is. A man called and said he dislocated his shoulder. He sounded sort of funny and like he was caught in something, so I asked him if he had fallen or something. No. I was putting on a thermal shirt and my shoulder popped out and now I'm stuck. I was going to drive myself to the hospital but I'd have to drive with my arm out of the window. Ambulance was dispatched for a shirt extrication and transport. I was a medic in Salt Lake for several years. The funniest call I was ever dispatched to was to an AutoZone for a penis injury on the battery aisle. I made the dispatcher repeat the details like 3 more times because, well, I wanted to hear her say it 3 times. Colleague, let's call her Sharon, answered this one. Sharon was from West Africa, and spoke excellent English with an accent that was mix of a British and her native language. I was her supervisor and listened in on this call. Male caller, my wife is trying to kill me. Sharon, what did she do? Male caller, she put a mothball in my crack pipe. Sharon, a what? Male caller, a mothball. Sharon, a mothball? Male caller, a mothball. Sharon, as an aside to me, what is a mothball? The what? A mothball. Exchange was repeated a few times. Though Sharon's English was excellent, mothball was one word she was unfamiliar with. And something about her accent as she kept repeating this just got to me. Listening in, I had a hard time stifling a laugh and couldn't compose myself enough to explain and get the dispatch out for a few moments. I explained mothballs to Sharon after the call ended. Ambulance sent due to possible lung damage from inhaling fumes from a burning mothball. Police sent for the crack pipe. 112 operator here. I had a woman who wanted to report herself dead. Like not in she wanted to commit suicide. Do not do that. There is help, and if you have these thoughts please talk to people or a doc about this, but she was sure that she died. A somewhat normal middle-aged woman, and she called 112, medics and fire. 110 is for cops, so we would get her a morgue. It was my strangest call ever to tell a person, who was very much alive talking to me, that in fact she was not dead. We sent an ambulance, for free. Long live the EU healthcare system. In the end it turned out to be a shroom-induced psychosis. Edit, yeah, weird, but also funny afterwards. Not to operator or a call, but in my town a guy was training naked on his balcony when his cat scratched his balls. Eventually, while the ambulance carrying him down the stairs, he told them the story and they dropped him because of laughter. I had to make a 999 call once, UK, and felt like a twat afterwards. My daughter, who was 1 at the time, was crying in her cot, so went to check on her and somehow she had got her head stuck between the bars. I tried for a good 10 minutes to get her out, to no avail. Had to call the fire brigade to come out. Must have sounded stupid, my baby's head's stuck in her cot bars anyway. Fire come out, lights and sirens, the whole 9 yards. 4 burly firemen come in and try to pry the bars. Nope. End up getting washing up liquid and lots of gentle tugging, and out pops the wee one's head. FFS. Also heard on a radio station a call recording of a fella who called 999 about a strange object in the sky. After much chat he finally realized it was the moon. Obligatory not a 911 operator, and I don't know if it's real, but there's this one I've heard a while back. 911, what's the emergency? I can hear gunshots. What kind of gunshots? Rat-a-tat-tat. In addition to 911, my agency also answers non-emergency calls. We mostly have women on my shift, and we had one guy keep calling until he finally got the lone male operator for that morning so he can air his complaint to someone who would understand. He used a toilet in one of the buildings we dispatch maintenance for, and his complaint was that the water level was too high. And he knows this because his balls touched the water when he sat down. When I was still in training, my supervisor would play back training 911 calls for me to listen to and dispatch. In one call, the caller says that their friend is dying and that they're in their car and they've pulled over on an access road near a busy restaurant. As the dispatcher asks more questions, we discover that the caller is holding their friend's internal organs in her hands. Dispatch asks all the questions, and eventually the caller says that their friend was hit by a car crossing the busy street in front of the restaurant. Dispatch keeps talking to her until a unit arrived on scene. They disconnect the call, and the next thing you hear is the unit keying up and trying to hold back the laughter as he reported that the victim had died of their injuries prior to his arrival. And that the victim was a squirrel. Not a 911 operator myself, but I'll never forget the cop that called 911 because he thought he and his wife had died from a weed overdose. I got a call from a sign language relay service, and these interpreters take their jobs very seriously. They convey emotion and never change the wording. So, the operator identifies herself as a relay service and breaks into screaming, "My baby's not breathing. My baby is not breathing." I ask how old the baby is. Baby is 1 year old. I was working fire/rescue this day and dispatched an ambulance, an engine, and the battalion commander. My co-worker across the room started police that way. I returned to the caller and started giving infant CPR EMD instructions. I instruct the caller to completely cover and seal the baby's mouth with their mouth. The interpreter then drops this bomb: "What if I can't get around the whiskers? Mom, what species is your baby? Cat." Fuck. I then have to get back on the radio and tell everyone to scale it down. The battalion commander continues on to see if they could help us. Did a police officer since 911 was dialed. The cat did not make it, unfortunately. While that is very sad because I love animals, I couldn't help but be baffled that this interpreter was watching the caller. She could see her. Why would she not tell me the baby was a cat? I get that they are not supposed to change the content, but this was a letter versus spirit of the law situation. It is very dangerous for emergency vehicles to drive code. I got a bunch of calls from the EMTs and cops throughout the shift laughing their butts off. I haven't done the job in 3 years now, but that'll always be fresh in my mind as one of my favorite stories. When I was 21, I came home to everything gone from my apartment, except a trash can, box spring, and 20-inch TV. I called 911 in a panic and was like, "Someone stole all of my shit and my girlfriend." I know she muted me and lost it, because when she came back on the call I could hear her trying to catch her breath and holding back laughter. She was quite patient with me and got me to calm down. Then she was like, "Sweetie, are you sure she didn't leave?" And I was like, "No way, we had sex last night. Why would she get me to have sex with her, just to leave the next morning?" She was basically in tears at this point, while also doing a good job of making me to the acceptance phase. Not an operator, but a friend got a call from someone who'd cut their foreskin mid-wank, and needed medical attention. I wasn't the call taker for this, but I work in a related area of business, probably the person who reported a UFO, but it turned out to be the moon //news. BBC. Co. UK/1/Hi/Wales/7489457. STM. I'm not a 911 operator, but I got a funny 911 call story. My older cousin Steve lived with his parents at age 45. He's always been a strange one. Apparently he was constipated, and instead of behaving like a normal adult and taking some X-Lax or stool softener, he decided it was indeed an emergency and called 911. He begged my aunt and uncle to help them, but they didn't want anything to do with his 6'8" 380 pounds ass problems. By the time the EMTs got there, cousin Steve was naked, prying apart his butt cheeks, demanding that they get the shit out of his ass. The emergency medical techs explained to him that he should really just try some OTC meds versus paying for the cost of an ambulance and hospital trip. I wish I could have seen this go down. Or maybe not. In the end, he stayed home and eventually took a ginormous dump. Yep. That's my family. God bless the EMTs of the world. I called the non-emergency line and the operator was supposed to put me on hold for a 911 call. She forgot to though, and I got to hear her explain to the caller that you can't call emergency services just because you don't like how someone is parked. Not even if they told you to fuck off and walked away. She sounded so tired, and I can't say I blame her. We once had a couple having sex in the post office back parking lot where they keep the postal trucks, and it closed and locked them in. The guy tried to climb over the fence to get out but got cut up on the barbed wire that was on the top of the fence. Someone called the cops about a guy bleeding profusely in front of the post office, so when they show up, they find him covered in blood and his lady friend locked in the post office parking lot. They were also both very drunk, so when the cops made them call someone to pick her up, apparently the only person she could call was her husband. The boyfriend had to go to the hospital for stitches. Some nights, it was like Jerry Springer at work. Had a homeless guy call the non-emergency line once because his friend had gotten arrested and he needed the number to the jail so he could call him. I told him I could provide him the number to the jail and asked him if he had a pen ready. I heard some stuff getting looked through, and eventually after about 45 seconds he goes, "I couldn't find a pen, but I found a rock." I was taken aback at this statement and asked him if he still wanted the number. So as I was giving him the number to the jail, he was scratching out the number to the jail somewhere in the city. If we have to just pick a 911 call, then once a lady called me because her kids were playing in a tree and there was a snake in the tree, so she needed an officer to remove the snake. I told her that snakes are allowed to be outside, so I wouldn't be sending an officer, and she goes, "So what if this snake falls down and bites one of my kids?" Quick word for anyone trying to be funny with 911 to 911 operators are the people who get help sent to people who need it. I hope I don't have to say this, but wasting their time can endanger lives. It isn't worth your funny joke. Once we got a call of a guy furiously masturbating in his car in the parking lot of a park. The cops show up and it turns out he was using a penis pump. He was married and had to go to the park to pump up his penis before he went to his girlfriend's house. The cop said it was an enormous penis and it was an extremely awkward encounter. I'm not an operator, this is just a story from my dad. He was pressing random buttons in his car a few months ago, trying to figure out some stuff. He ended up pressing a 911 button, and when they answered, my dad was insanely confused. Once they had a few laughs, the operator told him to hang up. Thing is though, he doesn't know how to. It was pretty funny. I am the operator of the call with that guy asking how illegal meth is. Not the 911 operator, but when I was working mall security, a teenager called the cops because he was really stoned and didn't want to drive. I mean, who wouldn't call the police in that situation? /s. The cop showed up, locked the kid's keys in his car, and drove off. Actual 911 operator here. Two that stand out to me is one man called and told me he was Batman and that we had killed his wife and he was coming for us. I dispatch for a very small town and no one had been killed in many years. Come to find out he was never married. Another one was an older male called and stated he had just gotten one of those push-start cars, but he didn't have the key on him and the car was locked and off and he didn't know how to get out. I explained to him to just look for an unlock button on the door or just pull up the little button beneath the window, but at this point he was in a full-blown panic attack. He was 100% certain he was going to die in that car. I sent police and fire and stayed on the phone with him while he asked me to tell his wife that he loved her. When fire got on scene, they pointed at the button and just made a pressing motion and he was out. He didn't die. My mom is a dispatcher. She's gotten a call from a woman who was angry because a fast food place got her order wrong. I called because there was an ostrich in my front yard. I live in rural area in Georgia, USA. I swore I wasn't drunk, but I'm not too sure I was believed. The crazy people are always pretty funny, telling me how they know the president, how they are international super spies, supermodels, been abducted, can see the future. The funniest was a lady who said she was locked inside her car and was freaking out because her daughter was about to get off the bus and she didn't want a bus full of high school kids laughing at her. I told her to unlock the doors and pull the handle, and that did the trick. My pal has had several calls over the years about sandwiches being dropped either because someone knocked it, they were holding too many things, they didn't like the taste, they couldn't open the packet like an adult, or they just dropped it with no rhyme or reason. Some have wanted people arrested for it. Some have wanted firms prosecuted for not selling or making them a new one. Some have wanted the sandwich arrested or sent to hospital to be saved. Many of these people have been drunk while surprising, some have not. Some were quite polite about the whole thing, particularly about it not being an emergency, while others have gone batshit crazy whereby someone had to go out to deal with them anyway. The operators have not been able to pin this down to any particular type of bread or sandwich filling. Back in the mid-1970s, yes, I'm old, prior to 9/11, fire departments and police departments had to answer their own phone calls for emergencies. Every fire department and every police department had its own emergency number. I worked at a fire station where the emergency phone was broadcast on a speaker in the station. Some guy calls one day and the conversation goes something like this: FD, fire department, is this an emergency? Guy, yeah, hey man, I'm over here by your old fire station and there's a cat laying in the gravel. I think he's injured. FD, okay, do you know what happened to him? Was he hit by a car? Guy, yeah, I don't know, man, he's bleeding and he ain't breathing, so, good. FD, okay, we'll let the Humane Society know and they'll take care of it. Humane Society is animal control where I am. Guy, yeah, okay, thanks man. Call ends, the phone rings a minute later. FD, fire department, is this an emergency? Guy, yeah, hey man, I just called about this injured cat. FD, yeah, we'll send the Humane Society. Guy, no man, you don't understand, this cat's a dude. FD, like a person? Guy, yeah man, he's a dude. FD, alright, we'll be right there. Late, but man did we have one chronic bullshit reporter. It was rare if we didn't get a call from her at least once a month. This woman would call and tell all sorts of stories, and to this day I'd if they're true, but I know she believes them. She would report that the meth heads that live in her woods are moving their product, and she can tell because they hoot like owls every time they do this. There's no way this sound is actual owls, because actual owls only hoot during mating season, and she knows for sure it is not mating season. She refused to let anyone search the property to rouse the meth heads. She swears someone trimmed the tails on every single one of her horses roughly 1 inch. She knows how long they were to start with and is positive someone trimmed every horse's tails exclusively. Reports her neighbor shot at her moving vehicle while she passed his house because the bullet chipped her windshield. It was definitely a bullet and definitely the neighbor because he flipped her off once while he was checking the mail. Couldn't imagine why he didn't like her. These were the most noteworthy while I was there, but she was still going strong when I left. No telling what she's reported since. Lol, why are there so many 911 calls in which someone got something stuck up their butt? Why are all these people shoving these things in their butt? Like, how does that happen? As an ERRN, I can tell you, they all fell on it. Toilet brushes, cukes, bulbs, bottles, fans. Some of them even had condoms on them before the accident. I had a conversation with a man that reported his wife missing. Very plausible story. Man seemed to be really concerned. After a couple of minutes I found out his wife died 7 years back and he was suffering from dementia. So I decided to bring him the bad news while on the phone. I said, "I'm afraid I have some bad news for you, sir. Your wife has been dead for 7 years now." I was anxiously waiting for his response. He replied in a very happy voice, "Right. I completely forgot." "Well, I'm glad I can stop looking now. Thanks, bye." 19 years/0 female was using an adult toy in the back door and it got stuck. Her parents made the 911 call because they couldn't remove it either. I worked in EMS at the same time too. God, I wish I could have been the EMT on that call instead of the dispatcher. I dispatched for a rural fire department. Some lady called the non-emergency number to complain that there was a dog stuck under her porch. I told her she needed to call animal control. "Here's the number." "You don't understand. The dog is under my porch." "Mom, is the dog on fire?" "No." "Then call animal control." I have two favorites. One intoxicated lady calling because her neighbor's chihuahuas were having sex and it was disgusting. One lady calling because someone left Mr. Good candy wrappers in her car and she just knew someone was trying to tell her he was her chocolate, her Mr. Good bar. Not an operator but was in law enforcement. I got a call on the radio one night and the 911 dispatch was laughing so hard she could barely breathe. When she caught her breath, she finally told me that a lady called 911 and she had stolen a pair of shoes from a store and they were the wrong size, and she called 911 because they wouldn't let her exchange them for the correct size. Tale from a friend of mine. So this was back in the early 90s, he was dispatcher in Davidson County, North Carolina, kind of rural, except a major highway went through it, both the main bypass, Interstate 85 and the business version of the Interstate 85. These were generally called I-85 and Business 85 by locals. They had some kind of telex, text-based system that sent stuff from other agencies to them. He got a telex message saying something along the line of "accident I-85 bus 64 injuries reported." He interpreted it as there was an accident on 85, a fucking bus flipped or something and there were 64 injured people. He mobilized every fucking EMS and fire unit in the county, and called in backup from adjacent counties. Turns out, it should have been interpreted there was an accident at Business 85 and Highway 64, with injuries reported. They gave him hell for that for years. Not an operator but I called 911 once and I still cringe to this day. I was the manager of a store in Boulder, Colorado, and was so miserable and overworked and stressed out, I finally had 2 days off in a row and was on my last hour when a fucking rabbit ran into the store and got caught between the wall and a jewelry case. My staff was literally incompetent at the time, so I had to figure it out. Long story short, I tried to get it out any way it could without killing it and it wasn't working. Called animal control, they were closed. So I literally called 911. The operator was so kind but basically said, "Don't call for shit like this ever again." Eventually we got the rabbit out alive, but it was a breaking point for me when I realized I needed to quit that job. That bunny changed my life, lol. I'm a receptionist at an assisted living. We see the police often due to hurt or dying residents, people falling being the most common incident. If a resident makes a call, often the police will call reception to give them a heads up / let the nurses know. Well, one night someone from memory care called the police. The officer then called me and said, "Hey, someone from your memory care called. Now she isn't responding, can you go check on her?" I go into her room and grab one of the nurse's aides on my way. We get to her room and ask if she needs help / why she called the police. She responded with, "Oh, I didn't call the police." I asked if she was sure. She said, "Why would I need to call the police? I'm just sitting here watching some TV." Once the aide and I were out of the room, we burst out laughing. I think we were both scared she was going to be seriously hurt, but instead this lady called the police and forgot why she called, and she was fine. We were just relieved. I went back to my phone and told the officer what happened. The officer said she had kept the line with the resident open and could hear us through the line.